The suitcase by the door was packed with bikinis and sundresses, a sharp contrast to the gray Chicago winter pressing against the penthouse glass. Ethan watched his wife check her reflection one last time, her eyes bright with the anticipation of a freedom that didn't include him, unaware that she was walking out of a door that would never open for her again. It wasn't the affair that destroyed them. It was the silence she left behind, and the silence he decided to keep until she returned. If you find yourself drawn to stories where the loudest heartbreak happens in absolute quiet, and where the consequences are as cold as they are inevitable, stay with me. There are many more layers to peel back in this house of secrets, and I'd love for you to see what happens when the lights finally turn on. The sound of the zipper was loud in the quiet bedroom, a harsh, tearing noise that seemed to rip through the last fragile layer of the atmosphere between them. Ethan stood by the window, looking down at the gray slush of the Chicago streets. It was 3 in the afternoon, but the sky was already darkening, pressing against the glass with a heavy, suffocating weight. Behind him, Clara was moving with an energy he hadn't seen in months. She was folding silk tops and counting bikinis, her movements sharp, efficient, and entirely self-absorbed. "It's just 30 days, Ethan," Clara said, not looking at him. She was focused on fitting a pair of wedges into the corner of her Samsonite. "We talked about this. I need to decompress. The winter here, it's killing my spirit. I feel like I'm suffocating in this apartment." Ethan turned slowly. He watched her tuck a bottle of expensive tanning oil next to her toiletries. Suffocating. That was the word she had been using for weeks. It was a convenient word. It made the apartment the villain, the weather the antagonist, and her the victim who just needed a little air. "You're going to be in South Beach during the busiest season of the year," Ethan said, his voice level, stripped of the desperation he felt a week ago. "That's not exactly a meditation retreat, Clara." Clara stopped. She stood up, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. She looked beautiful, he had to admit. But it was a distant kind of beauty, like a piece of art behind a velvet rope. "I'm staying at the Airbnb with Jessica and Sarah," she said, her tone defensive, rehearsed. "We're going to do yoga. We're going to read by the pool. I need to feel like me again. Not Ethan's wife. Just Clara. Is that so wrong?" "Freedom," Ethan murmured. "What?" "You called it a search for freedom last night." Clara sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. She walked over to him, placing a hand on his forearm. Her touch was light, almost impersonal. "I'm coming back, Ethan. Don't make this into a tragedy. It's a break, a reset button. When I get back, I'll be refreshed. We'll be better." Ethan looked down at her hand. He noticed she wasn't wearing her wedding band. She had taken it off to apply lotion earlier and hadn't put it back on. Or maybe she had packed it away, safely tucked in a velvet pouch where it wouldn't leave a tan line. "You really believe that?" Ethan stated. It wasn't a question. "I do," she said, withdrawing her hand to check her phone. The screen lit up with a notification from Jessica. "Uber is 5 minutes away. Mimosas at the airport." Clara's face lit up in a way it hadn't for him in 2 years. It was a spark of genuine, unadulterated excitement. She zipped the suitcase shut with a finality that echoed off the hardwood floors. "I have to go," she said, breathless. She grabbed her coat, the expensive beige trench he had bought her for Christmas. "Don't look so grim. Text me later. I'll let you know when we land." She didn't wait for an answer. She grabbed the handle of her luggage and wheeled it toward the hallway. The wheels rumbled over the threshold, a low growl of departure. Ethan didn't move from the window. He heard the front door open, letting in a draft of freezing hallway air. "Bye, Ethan," she called out, her voice already halfway down the corridor. "Goodbye, Clara," he whispered to the empty room. He heard the heavy thud of the door closing. The lock clicked into place. Ethan looked down at the street again. 3 minutes later, he saw her emerge from the building, a small figure wrestling a large silver suitcase into the back of a black SUV. She didn't look up at their window. She didn't pause. She slammed the car door, and the vehicle merged into the traffic, disappearing into the gray blur of the city. Ethan turned back to the room. It smelled of her perfume, sandalwood and false promises. He walked over to the nightstand, where she had left her spare set of house keys. She hadn't taken them. She assumed she wouldn't need them until she returned. He picked up the keys, the metal cold against his palm. 30 days, he said aloud. He walked out of the bedroom and into his study. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and stared at the blinking cursor. He didn't text her. He didn't check the flight status. Instead, he opened a new tab and typed in the search bar. Real estate lawyers, Chicago. The silence in the apartment was no longer suffocating. It was clarifying. The silence in the apartment had a texture. It was heavy and granular, settling over the furniture like dust. For the first 2 days, Ethan moved through the rooms like an intruder in his own life. He kept the television on low volume, a constant murmur of news anchors and weather reports to push back against the quiet. But the emptiness was persistent. It wasn't just that Clara was gone. It was that her absence felt more permanent than a vacation. He maintained the routine. He woke at 6, ground the coffee beans, and stood by the kitchen island, drinking from his ceramic mug while watching the snow swirl against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below was a monochrome grid of gray and white, locked in the deep freeze of January. On the third evening, the ghost appeared. It wasn't a spectral figure in the hallway, but a pulse of blue light from the kitchen counter. Clara had left her iPad behind, the one she used for recipes and reading digital magazines. It was propped up on its stand, plugged into the charger, a forgotten sleek slab of glass in the shadows of the granite countertop. Ethan was rinsing his dinner plate when the screen lit up. The room was dark, and the sudden illumination drew his eye immediately. Ping. A notification banner slid across the lock screen, then another. Ethan turned off the faucet. The water dripped once, twice, echoing in the stainless steel sink. He walked over to the island, towel in hand, intending to flip the cover closed and ignore it. He wanted to give her the privacy she had weaponized against him. But the screen remained lit. It was a photo stream update. Because the device was synced to her iCloud account, every photo she took in Miami was pushing to the Chicago apartment in real time, bypassing the distance she had placed between them. He shouldn't look. He knew with a sinking feeling in his gut that looking would change things. But the image was already there, bright and high definition against the dark kitchen. It was a selfie. Clara was holding a cocktail in a plastic cup, her head thrown back, laughing. The background was a blur of neon lights and palm trees. She looked radiant, her skin already flushed with sun and alcohol. But it wasn't the joy in her face that stopped Ethan's breath. It was the hand resting familiarly on her shoulder. It was a man's hand, tanned, wearing a heavy gold watch. Ethan stared at the hand. It wasn't possessive, not yet, but it was comfortable. It was the kind of touch that didn't happen between strangers. Ping. A text message preview appeared at the top of the screen, overlaying the photo. Jessica, he's totally into you. Did you see the way he paid for the cab? Keep the ring off, babe. Tonight is about you. Ethan felt a coldness spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the Chicago winter. Keep the ring off. He reached out, his finger hovering over the glass. He didn't know the passcode to unlock the device, but he didn't need to. The preview was enough. The stream continued to update. Another photo popped up. This one was a group shot at a table crowded with seafood towers and tequila bottles. Clara was in the center. The man with the gold watch leaning in close, whispering something into her ear. She wasn't pulling away. She was leaning in. Ethan set the dish towel down on the counter. He didn't smash the tablet. He didn't yell. He simply pulled a stool out and sat down in the dark kitchen, the blue light of the screen illuminating his stoic features. He watched. It was a grotesque voyeurism. He was watching his marriage dissolve in 4K resolution. Every 30 minutes, a new image or a snippet of conversation would ghost onto the screen, a digital breadcrumb trail of her descent into freedom. She had told him she needed space to find herself. What she had found, apparently, was a table at a club and a man who paid for cabs. He realized then that the silence in the apartment wasn't empty. It was filled with the truth she hadn't had the courage to tell him to his face. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat in the kitchen, the coffee in his mug turning ice cold, serving as the silent witness to his wife's new life. He didn't turn the iPad off. He let the battery drain, let the notifications pile up, let the digital ghost haunt him until the sun rose over the frozen lake, bringing no warmth, only a harsh, gray light that exposed everything. The erosion of a marriage does not always happen with a bang. Sometimes it happens with the soft, digital chime of a social media story update. 3 days into the trip, the dynamic shifted. The initial barrage of photos slowed, replaced by a curated narrative that Ethan found more disturbing than the images of alcohol or men. Through the window of the iPad, which remained propped on the kitchen island like a shrine to his wife's infidelity, Ethan watched Clara rewrite 5 years of history. He sat at the dining table, a stack of blueprints for a rooftop garden in Lincoln Park spread out before him, but his eyes kept drifting to the screen. Clara had posted a video. It was a story meant to disappear in 24 hours, but for Ethan, it was permanent. In the video, Clara was sitting on a white lounge chair by a pool, oversized sunglasses reflecting the palm trees. She was speaking to the camera, her voice possessing a performative rasp he didn't recognize. "It's crazy," she said, swirling a straw in her glass. "You don't realize how small your world has become until you step out of it. I feel like I've been asleep for years, just walking through a life someone else designed for me." Ethan felt a muscle in his jaw tighten. Someone else designed. He looked around the apartment. The mid-century modern furniture she had insisted on, the expensive art she had selected, the neighborhood she had cried tears of joy to move into. He had worked 80-hour weeks to build the walls she now claimed were a prison. In the background of the video, a female voice, likely Jessica, laughed. "To freedom, baby. No more boring dinners." "No more boring dinners," Clara echoed, clinking her glass against the lens. Ethan looked down at his phone. He had a draft text message open, typed out an hour ago. "Hope you're safe. Miss you." He stared at the words. They looked pathetic now. They were artifacts from a relationship that only existed in his memory. To Clara, his concern wasn't love. It was the small world she was escaping. She wasn't just having a good time. She was actively dismantling his character to validate her choices. If he was the boring, controlling husband who stifled her, then her behavior in Miami wasn't betrayal, it was survival. It was a convenient lie, and she was wearing it as easily as she wore her new bikini. He deleted the text. Backspace, backspace, backspace. The cursor blinked in the empty field, waiting for a new thought that didn't come. For the first time since they met, Ethan didn't want to reach out. The worry that had knotted his stomach for 72 hours began to unravel, replaced by a cold, clinical clarity. It was the sensation of a fever breaking, leaving the patient weak but lucid. On the screen, another notification popped up. A location tag, Club Live, VIP table. He didn't check the time. He didn't wonder who was paying for the table. The why no longer mattered. The erosion was complete. She had successfully scrubbed away the husband she left in Chicago, reducing him to a footnote in her journey of self-discovery. Ethan stood up and walked to the kitchen. He unplugged the iPad. He didn't turn it off, but he carried it into the guest bedroom, the room they rarely used, and placed it face down on the dresser. He closed the door, shutting the glowing blue light inside. He walked back to the living room, the silence now feeling less like an absence and more like a strategy. If she wanted to be free of him, he would grant her wish entirely. He would not be the nagging voice on her phone. He would be nothing. He picked up his phone one last time, not to text her, but to open his banking app. He stared at the joint account balance, the numbers stark and white against the dark background. Then, with a steady hand, he tapped the transfer option. It was time to separate the assets. The Chicago wind howled against the glass, a low, mournful sound that seemed to vibrate through the steel beams of the high-rise. Inside, the apartment was perfectly still. Ethan sat in his leather armchair, a tumbler of whiskey resting untouched on the side table. It was 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. He wasn't looking at the iPad in the guest room anymore. He had successfully ignored it for 24 hours, trying to convince himself that the curated photos of dinners and sunsets were just that, images of a woman enjoying a vacation. He had almost convinced himself that his paranoia was the problem, that he was the suffocating weight she had described. Then his phone buzzed. It wasn't a text from Clara. It was a message from Andrew, a college friend who now worked in finance in Miami. Ethan hadn't spoken to Andrew in 6 months, which made the late-night notification jarring. The message was short. "Hey man, I hesitated to send this, but if it were me, I'd want to know. I'm at E11 even. Saw this." Below the text was a video file. Ethan stared at the thumbnail. It was dark, illuminated only by the strobe lights of a nightclub. His thumb hovered over the screen. His heart hammered a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs, a physical warning of the impact to come. He pressed play. The video was shaky, filmed from a distance, likely from a VIP balcony looking down. The bass of the music distorted the audio, a thumping, chaotic noise. In the center of the frame, amidst a crowd of bodies moving in sync, was Clara. There was no mistaking her platinum blonde hair or the sequined silver dress he had seen in her suitcase. She wasn't dancing with her friends. She was pressed against the railing, her arms wrapped around the neck of the man with the gold watch. He was no longer a stranger in the background. He was the focal point of her world. As Ethan watched, the man leaned in. Clara didn't turn away. She didn't laugh it off. She pulled him closer. They kissed. Not a peck, not a drunk mistake, but a lingering, desperate kiss that spoke of intimacy and intent. It was the kind of kiss she hadn't given Ethan in years. It was hungry. It was real. The video ended. The screen went black, reflecting Ethan's face back at him. He looked ghostly pale in the display light. He didn't play it again. He didn't need to analyze the frames to see if she was coerced or too intoxicated. The body language was clear. She looked liberated. She looked like she had forgotten she had a husband, a home, or a life waiting for her 2,000 miles north. Ethan set the phone down on the table next to the whiskey. He didn't drink it. The burning sensation in his chest wasn't something alcohol could soothe. It was the feeling of a cord being cut. The final, frayed tether that had bound him to Clara snapping under the tension. He stood up and walked to the window. The city lights of Chicago sprawled out below him, a grid of cold electricity. He felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The anxiety of the what if was gone. The ambiguity was gone. He walked back to his desk. He woke his laptop from sleep mode and opened his email client. He found the contact information for the family law firm he had researched days ago. He didn't write a long, emotional letter. He didn't explain the betrayal or the heartbreak. He simply typed the subject line, "Divorce Proceedings. Ethan and Clara Miller." In the body of the email, he wrote 2 sentences. "I would like to retain your services to initiate a divorce filing immediately. The assets are significant, and I require an expedited process." He hit send. The freedom Clara had flown to Miami to find was now absolute. She just didn't know it yet. When she returned, she wouldn't be coming back to a marriage in crisis. She would be coming back to nothing. Ethan closed the laptop. The sound of the lid snapping shut was the only noise in the apartment, sharp and final, like a gavel striking a desk. The phone call came on a Thursday morning, interrupting the rhythmic sound of packing tape being stretched and severed. Ethan let it ring 3 times before answering, ensuring his voice was steady, stripped of the jagged edges of the last few days. "Hey." Clara's voice was raspy, the vocal fry more pronounced than usual. "Did I wake you? I know it's early there." "I'm up," Ethan said, looking around the living room. It was already half empty. The bookshelves that had lined the west wall were bare. The novels and design monographs packed into uniform cardboard boxes stacked by the door. "Everything okay?" Yeah, everything is intense," she said. She paused, and he could hear the sound of wind and possibly the ocean in the background. She was likely on a balcony, seeking reception away from her sleeping friends. "Listen, Ethan. I've been doing a lot of thinking. The girls think. I think that I'm on the verge of a breakthrough. I really feel like I'm peeling back layers here." Ethan picked up a framed photograph from the mantel. It was from their honeymoon in Tuscany. They looked young, unburdened. He turned it over and released the frame's backing, sliding the photo out. "You want to stay longer?" he stated. "Just a week," she rushed to explain. "Maybe 10 days. I just don't want to interrupt the process, you know? I don't want to come back halfway healed. I want to come back whole for you, for us." The manipulation was clumsy, but effective. She was banking on his desire to fix things. She didn't know she was negotiating with a man who had already left the table. "Take the time, Clara," Ethan said, dropping the empty silver frame into a donation box. He crumpled the photo in his hand, a sharp crinkling sound that the phone didn't pick up. "Stay as long as you need to find what you're looking for." "Really?" Her relief was audible. "You're the best, Ethan. I knew you'd understand. I promise I'll make it up to you when I get back." "I know," he said. "Enjoy the weather." He hung up. He didn't feel anger. He felt a grim satisfaction. She had just bought him the buffer he needed to close the deal. An hour later, the freight elevator buzzed. The cash buyer Ethan had contacted through a network of developers wasn't interested in a walkthrough or an inspection. The market in the Gold Coast was aggressive, and the price Ethan had set was designed to move the asset, not maximize profit. He wanted out, not a bidding war. The movers worked with the efficiency of a demolition crew. Ethan directed them with a clipboard in hand. His instructions were binary: storage or trash. "The master bedroom?" the foreman asked, gesturing down the hall. "Pack the women's clothing into wardrobes. Label them Storage B. Everything else, furniture, linens, decor, goes to the auction house consignment," Ethan instructed. He walked into the walk-in closet one last time. It still smelled like her, a mix of expensive shampoo and the distinct scent of the leather bags she collected. He watched as the movers swept rows of designer dresses into plastic bags. It looked less like moving and more like evidence collection. By late afternoon, the apartment was a hollow shell. The art was gone, leaving ghost-like rectangles of cleaner paint on the walls. The rugs were rolled up, exposing the hardwood that echoed with every footstep. Ethan stood in the center of the living room with the real estate attorney and the buyer's agent. The paperwork was spread out on the kitchen island, the only surface remaining. "Possession is immediate," the buyer's agent confirmed, pen hovering over the signature line. "Immediate," Ethan said. "The keys are on the counter. The codes have been reset." He signed his name. The loops of the E and the cross of the T felt heavy, like he was carving the letters into stone. With that signature, the locks Clara had in her purse in Miami became useless metal. The sanctuary she thought was waiting for her, the safety net she relied on while she played with fire, was legally transferred to a holding company. He walked to the elevator with a single duffel bag over his shoulder. He didn't look back at the view of the lake. He pressed the button for the lobby, the doors sliding shut on the empty white room. "Enjoy your breakthrough, Clara," he whispered to the steel doors. The Miami sun was no longer inviting. It was an interrogation lamp. It streamed through the gaps in the blackout curtains of the hotel suite, slicing across the disarray of the room: scattered clothes, empty champagne bottles, and the sandy debris of a week spent chasing a youth that had long since passed. Clara woke up with a headache that throbbed behind her eyes, a dull, rhythmic reminder of the previous night's excess. She sat up, pulling the sheet tight against her chest. Next to her, the man with the gold watch, whose name, she reminded herself, was Julian, was still asleep. In the harsh daylight, the allure he held in the dim glow of the nightclub had evaporated. His mouth hung slightly open, and the charm of his attentive pursuit had been replaced by a possessive indifference. She looked at him and felt nothing. No spark, no thrill, just a hollow exhaustion and a sudden, sharp craving for silence. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and walked to the bathroom. The mirror reflected a woman who looked frayed. The tan that had seemed glowing a week ago now looked leathery and dehydrated. Her eyes were rimmed with red. This was the freedom she had fought for. A headache, a stranger in her bed, and a soul-deep fatigue that no amount of coconut water could fix. She turned on the faucet, splashing cold water on her face. As the water dripped from her chin, a memory of Chicago intruded. She thought of the way Ethan made coffee on Sunday mornings, quietly, precisely, bringing her a mug while she was still under the duvet. She missed the temperature of the apartment. She missed the predictability. She realized with a jolt of nausea that the chaos she had craved was only fun because she thought she had a safety net to fall back into. She needed to go home. Clara walked back into the bedroom and picked up her phone. She had extended the trip, but now the extra days stretched out before her like a sentence. She opened the airline app and changed her ticket. The fee was exorbitant, but she didn't care. She charged it to the joint credit card, assuming Ethan would just absorb it as another cost of her mental health break. She booked the first flight out for the following morning. "Babe?" Julian's voice was a groggy mumble from the bed. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to get breakfast," Clara lied effortlessly. "Go back to sleep." She didn't get breakfast. Instead, she sat on the balcony, staring at the ocean, and began the work of sanitizing her life. She opened her photo gallery and started deleting. The pictures of the club, the selfies with Julian, the shots of the expensive dinners, she erased them all. She scrubbed the digital evidence until her camera roll looked like the innocent vacation of a woman finding herself. Sunsets, avocado toast, pictures of the beach. She was constructing the narrative she would present to Ethan. "I missed you," she practiced saying in her head. "It was beautiful, but I realized my life is with you." She believed it. She believed that her return would be a gift to him, that her brief detour into infidelity would actually make her a better wife because she had gotten it out of her system. She opened her texts and sent a message to Ethan. "I'm coming home tomorrow. I think I've found what I needed. Can't wait to see you. Love you." She watched the screen, waiting for the 3 dots that would indicate he was typing. Minutes passed. The message status changed to delivered, but not read. He was probably busy, she told herself. Or maybe he was still sulking about the extension. It didn't matter. Once she was back, once she was in the apartment making him dinner and filling the silence with stories of her epiphany, he would soften. He always did. He was Ethan, steady, reliable, immovable Ethan. She stood up and went back inside to pack. She folded the sequined dress and shoved it to the bottom of the suitcase. She wouldn't be needing that in Chicago. She was done with the costume. She was ready to put her wedding ring back on, unaware that the finger it belonged to was no longer bound to anything real. The transition was violent. One moment, Clara was breathing the humid, salt-thick air of Florida. 3 hours later, she was standing on the curb at O'Hare, the wind whipping her hair across her face like icy lashes. The gray sky of Chicago felt punitive. A heavy lid clamped down over the city. She shivered in her trench coat, which suddenly felt too thin. The tan she had cultivated so carefully seemed to fade instantly under the fluorescent glare of the arrivals terminal. She wrestled her silver suitcase into the back of a taxi, the same heavy luggage she had left with, though now it felt weighted down with dirty laundry and regret. During the ride into the city, Clara rehearsed her opening lines. "I'm so happy to be home. I missed us. I'm ready to work on things." She checked her makeup in the rearview mirror. She looked tired, but she told herself it looked like vulnerability. Ethan had a savior complex. He would see her exhaustion and want to fix it. He would make her tea, listen to her curated version of the trip, and eventually, life would resume its comfortable rhythm. The taxi pulled up to their building in the Gold Coast. The doorman, a new guy she didn't recognize, was busy with a delivery truck and didn't look up as she breezed past him into the lobby. She felt a flicker of annoyance. Usually, Ralph would be there to take her bags, but she pushed it aside. She just wanted to be upstairs. She wanted her bathtub and her bed. The elevator ride was smooth and silent. As the numbers climbed, Clara's heart rate picked up. She felt a mix of guilt and anticipation. She was ready to be forgiven. The doors slid open on the penthouse floor. The hallway was quiet, the carpet freshly vacuumed. She walked to the heavy oak door at the end of the corridor, Unit 4B, her home. She reached into her purse and fished out her key ring. The familiar brass key, the one she had carried for 5 years, felt solid in her hand. She slid it into the lock. It didn't go in. Clara frowned. She jiggled it, thinking she had the angle wrong. She tried again, pushing harder. The key slid in halfway and hit an obstruction. It wasn't just stuck. The mechanism was different. The cylinder had been changed. "Ethan!" she muttered, a spike of irritation rising in her chest. Passive-aggressive, she thought. He changed the locks to make a point. It was petty, and unlike him, but she supposed she deserved a little drama before the reconciliation. She raised her hand and knocked firmly on the wood. "Ethan, it's me! Open up, my key isn't working!" Silence. She knocked again, harder this time. "Ethan, come on, it's freezing out here, stop playing games." She heard footsteps on the other side. Heavy, unfamiliar footsteps. They didn't sound like Ethan's sock-footed tread. The lock tumbled, a smooth, heavy click that her key hadn't made. The door swung open. Clara composed her face into a smile that was half apology, half seduction, ready to melt Ethan's resolve. The words died in her throat. Standing in the doorway was not Ethan. It was a woman in her 50s, wearing a gray cashmere sweater and holding a roll of painter's tape. Behind her, the apartment was unrecognizable. The hallway walls, once a warm cream, were stark white. The console table where they kept the mail was gone. The space echoed with the hollowness of an empty cavern. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her tone polite but guarded. Clara blinked, her brain misfiring. I live here. Where is Ethan?" The woman's expression shifted from curiosity to pity. She glanced down at the suitcase, then back at Clara's face. "You must be Clara." It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation of a dossier she had likely read during closing. "Who are you?" Clara demanded, her voice rising. "Why are you in my apartment? Where is my husband?" "I'm the owner," the woman said softly. "We closed on Tuesday. This is my apartment now." "That's impossible," Clara laughed, a jagged, hysterical sound. "I've been gone for a month. You can't sell a house in a month. Let me in. I need to call him." She tried to push past the woman, desperate to see the living room, to see her sofa, her art, something that would prove this was a hallucination. The woman blocked her path firmly. "Ma'am, you can't come in. The unit is empty. Your husband, the previous owner, left instructions. He said you might come." "Instructions," Clara whispered. The blood drained from her face, leaving her lightheaded. "He said everything has been moved out," the woman explained. "He said you should contact his attorney. He left a card for you with the concierge." The woman started to close the door. "I'm sorry, really, but you have to leave." "Wait!" Clara slammed her hand against the wood. "Where is he? Where did he go?" "I don't know," the stranger said, and this time, the pity was gone, replaced by the discomfort of witnessing someone else's ruin. "He just signed the papers and handed over the keys. He's gone." The door clicked shut. The sound was final. A deadbolt slid into place. Clara stood alone in the hallway. The silence of the corridor was absolute. She looked at the brass key in her hand, a piece of metal that opened nothing, belonging to a life that had been sold, packed, and erased while she was busy drinking mimosas in Miami. The address the concierge had reluctantly given her belonged to a corporate housing block near the Loop, a building of steel and glass that felt more like a waiting room than a home. Clara stood outside the door of Unit 1204, her hand trembling as she raised it to knock. She had spent the last 2 hours in a daze, her suitcase dragging behind her like a dead weight, her mind racing through a frantic inventory of apologies and accusations. She knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Ethan stood there. He was wearing a white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up, and dark trousers. He looked infuriatingly composed. There were no bags under his eyes, no scent of whiskey on his breath. He looked like a man who had finished a long project and was ready to rest. "Ethan," she breathed, the word cracking in the middle. She moved to step inside, instinctively reaching for him. He didn't step back, but he didn't move forward. He simply held up a hand, a stop sign that froze her on the threshold. "You can come in," he said, his voice devoid of any familiar warmth. "But leave the bags in the hall." Clara hesitated, then obeyed. She stepped into the apartment. It was beige, sterile, and smelled of lemon furniture polish. On the coffee table there was a single manila envelope. "How could you?" she burst out, the shock turning into a weapon. "You sold our home, Ethan. You changed the locks. I was gone for 30 days. You threw away 5 years in 30 days. Ethan walked over to the window, turning his back to her. "I didn't throw it away, Clara. I just packed up what was left." "I needed space," she cried, tears finally spilling over. "I told you I was suffocating. I went there to fix myself so I could be better for us. And I come back to this? To a homeless shelter?" Ethan turned around. He looked at her, really looked at her, studying the fading tan and the desperation in her eyes. "Did you find it?" he asked quietly. "Find what?" "Freedom." Clara froze. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and sharp. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, her voice dropping to a whisper. Ethan walked to the kitchenette counter. He picked up his phone and tapped the screen once. He turned it around to face her. It was the still frame of the video Andrew had sent. Clara, head thrown back, lost in the arms of the man with the gold watch. "The iPad was synced, Clara," he said simply. "I saw everything. The dinners, the club, the boring life you mocked to your friends. I saw the guy." Clara's face crumpled. The defense she had prepared, the gaslighting, the denial, evaporated instantly. "Ethan, that was... It meant nothing. It was a mistake. I was drunk. I was lonely. It was just a stupid fling. I came back, didn't I? I came back to you." "You came back because you were tired," Ethan corrected her. "You came back because the party ended and you needed a place to sleep. You didn't come back to me. You came back to your safety net." He picked up the manila envelope from the table and held it out to her. "What is this?" she asked, though she knew. "Divorce papers. I've signed them. The house proceeds are in an escrow account. You get half. It's more than enough to start over." Clara didn't take the envelope. She clasped her hands together, pleading, "Please, we can fix this. We can go to therapy. I love you, Ethan. Doesn't that matter?" Ethan looked at her, and for a second, Clara saw a flicker of the man who used to look at her with adoration. But then the shutter came down, blocking the light. "The woman I loved wouldn't have done what you did," Ethan said. "And the man who would have forgiven you? He doesn't exist anymore. You left him in that apartment, and he died there waiting for you." He placed the envelope in her hands. Her fingers closed around it automatically. "I have a flight in the morning," Ethan said, checking his watch. "I'm moving to Seattle. The job market is good there. New scenery." "You're leaving?" she whispered. "Just like that?" "I left weeks ago, Clara. You just didn't notice because you were too busy being free." He walked past her to the door and held it open. The fluorescent light of the hallway spilled in, illuminating her suitcase standing lonely on the carpet. "Goodbye, Clara." Clara looked at him, searching for a crack in the armor, a hint of hesitation. There was none. She walked out into the hallway, the envelope heavy in her hand. The door closed behind her. She stood in the silence of the corridor, the mechanical hum of the vending machine down the hall the only sound. She was free. She had no husband, no home, no obligations. She had the freedom she had flown 2,000 miles to find. And as she stood there, realized she had never felt more trapped in her entire life.